Part 1. The Whisper Beneath the Ice. It began with a tremor. Not the violent kind that shatters cities, but a low, rhythmic pulse, almost like a heartbeat, echoing from beneath one of the coldest and most remote places on Earth. In the early months of 2028, seismic stations scattered across Antarctica began recording a signal that didn't fit any known geological pattern. It wasn't the cracking of ice, nor the movement of tectonic plates. It repeated precisely every 17 hours and 21 minutes. Then, as if on cue, it would stop. At first, researchers assumed a calibration error. Then a second station picked it up. Then a third. Within weeks, the anomaly had been confirmed by instruments thousands of kilometers apart. It was deep, originating from nearly 25 kilometers below the Antarctic crust, a depth at which even the most powerful earthquakes lose their signature. The discovery landed quietly in a digital report by the International Seismic Consortium. Few noticed it, but a team of glaciologists from the British Antarctic Survey did. Among them was Dr. Eleanor Voss, a veteran of polar research. In her decades of studying subglacial movement, she had never seen anything like it. It was organized, she later said. Almost mechanical. Satellite data soon revealed something else. A slow, circular deformation in the ice sheet near the Gamburtsev Mountains, a buried range twice the size of the Alps hidden beneath miles of ice. The surface was rising and falling, as if the continent itself were breathing. What could possibly move a block of ice the size of France, in rhythm, from below? The world had long thought of Antarctica as a frozen, silent continent. But in recent decades, that perception had begun to shift. Underneath the ice lies a network of vast subglacial lakes, over 400 of them, connected by unseen rivers that flow in total darkness. Some of these lakes haven't seen sunlight for millions of years. When scientists first drilled into Lake Vostok in 2012, they found signs of microbial life that had evolved in isolation since the age of dinosaurs. Now, this new anomaly, dubbed the Pulse, seemed to be coming from a location even deeper than any known lake. Sonar mapping revealed an immense void, a cavern nearly 300 kilometers wide, filled not with ice, but liquid water and strange mineral sediments that reflected radar in unpredictable ways. At first, researchers proposed natural explanations: geothermal activity, trapped gas, pressure fluctuations from melting glaciers. But none accounted for the precise periodicity of the pulse. Earth does not move with metronomic rhythm. Life does. Within months, the pulse became the most closely guarded topic in earth sciences. Governments quietly restricted access to the data. Public reports were sanitized. Yet leaks began appearing, snippets of satellite images, anonymized seismograms, fragments of encrypted communications between research outposts. One image in particular sparked a storm of speculation. Taken by the European Sentinel satellite during a radar sweep, it showed an unnaturally symmetrical pattern beneath the ice, a circular ridge 12 kilometers across with a central depression. It looked like a crater, but its edges were too smooth, too deliberate. Some saw the marks of an ancient impact, others of a buried volcano. A few dared to suggest something more controversial: an artificial structure, sealed away for millions of years beneath the frozen crust. Most scientists dismissed that idea immediately. But then came the magnetic readings. As the pulse continued, satellites registered a growing magnetic anomaly emanating from the same region, a localized distortion strong enough to interfere with orbital communications. It pulsed in sync with the seismic rhythm. The two were linked. When Dr. Voss presented her findings at an internal conference in Geneva, she was asked to remove her slides mid-session. 2 weeks later, her research license for Antarctic operations was suspended without explanation. The world moved on. But underground channels, journalists, researchers, amateur radio operators began piecing together a story. And the story suggested something extraordinary. Could it be that beneath Antarctica, beneath layers of ice older than civilization itself, something was stirring? This is the mystery of the pulse, a phenomenon that could rewrite what we know about the planet's interior, its history, and perhaps even the origins of life itself. Because if the data is right, this signal didn't just start in 2028. It's been repeating, quietly, faintly, since the dawn of human record-keeping. We just never had the instruments to hear it. Part 2. The first detection. For decades, Antarctica's seismic network had been little more than a string of remote listening posts, solar-powered outcrops dotting a frozen continent, transmitting faint electrical whispers through the static. They existed to detect icequakes, monitor glacier movement, and occasionally catch the tremors of faraway earthquakes that echoed through the Earth's crust like deep bass tones in a vast drum. The first anomaly came from one such post, Station Argus 7, located near the Dome Sea Plateau, where the ice sheet rises more than 3 kilometers above sea level. On January 14, 2028, its sensors recorded a harmonic oscillation that lasted precisely 11 minutes. The data were transmitted via satellite to the International Seismic Consortium in Zurich, where an automated algorithm flagged it as an unidentified low-frequency event. Normally, that would have been the end of it. Just another statistical glitch in the ocean of background noise. But 2 days later, the same waveform appeared at Station Titan, 600 kilometers away, then again at Halley 6, near the coast. The signal was identical, same frequency, same decay pattern, same timestamp offset. The probability of 3 independent instruments recording identical patterns by coincidence was essentially 0. Within a week, the data reached Dr. Thomas Reeve, a computational geophysicist working at the European Polar Research Institute. Reeve had spent his career mapping the deep Earth, using seismic echoes to reconstruct the hidden geography beneath the crust. When he saw the pattern, his first thought was that it resembled an artificial modulation, not a random tremor but something encoded. At first, he suspected interference. Antarctic stations relied on low-bandwidth communication relays, vulnerable to stray radio emissions from passing satellites. But the signals were recorded before transmission, directly from the ground accelerometers. It was as if the planet itself was broadcasting, Reeve later wrote in his lab notes. Curious, he synchronized the data streams from all 3 stations and overlaid them. What emerged was unsettling. The signal wasn't a simple pulse. It carried structure, subharmonics repeating in ratios of 3 to 2 to 1, patterns commonly found in biological rhythms and resonance systems, not in geological ones. He submitted his findings to the consortium for peer review. The response was lukewarm. Instrument drift, they said. Cross-contamination of digital sensors. One reviewer suggested an unlikely but comforting possibility, that the pulse was a byproduct of melting ice collapsing into a subglacial cavity. Another hinted at human error. But Reeve wasn't alone. Thousands of kilometers away, at McMurdo Station, a young seismic technician named Aisha Grant had noticed the same anomaly. She had initially brushed it off, but curiosity got the better of her. One night, she wrote a simple script to compare live data across all Antarctic outposts. When her computer finished processing, the output froze her in place. The pulse appeared not only across Antarctica, but faintly in data streams from Chile, South Africa, and Australia, stations separated by entire oceans. The Earth itself seemed to be ringing. She uploaded the visualization to an internal research forum under the title, Persistent Harmonic Event, Global? Within hours, the thread exploded with replies. Some dismissed it as noise. Others saw what Reeve had seen, order. 2 days later, Grant's access to the internal servers was revoked without explanation. Her supervisor called it a security measure. By late February, rumors had leaked beyond scientific circles. Amateur radio operators in Finland and Argentina began reporting interference at matching frequencies, even though they were monitoring atmospheric bands, not seismic ones. A few online forums began circulating the term Earthbeat. Meanwhile, the official stance of the International Seismic Consortium was silence. Their press release described the phenomenon as a localized resonance anomaly under investigation. But privately, Reeve and a handful of colleagues were allowed to continue analyzing the data under strict confidentiality. They noticed something extraordinary. The signal wasn't constant in amplitude. Every 21 cycles, it shifted slightly in phase, a modulation that, when plotted over time, formed a geometric pattern resembling a spiral. "This isn't random noise," Reeve wrote. "It's a waveform with memory." As the weeks passed, the pattern intensified. New sensors in East Antarctica registered minor shifts in gravity consistent with mass movement deep below the crust. It was as though a massive fluid body was oscillating, driving the seismic rhythm from within. In early March, Reeve convened a closed video call with 12 researchers. They compared datasets, instrument logs, and satellite altimetry. The group included glaciologists, oceanographers, and one astrophysicist, Dr. Voss, who had returned from her last Antarctic mission only months earlier. Voss was the first to suggest a link with geothermal mapping data, subtle heat signatures that had been recorded under the ice for years but never explained. "We always assumed they came from volcanic pockets," she said. "But they align perfectly with the source coordinates of the pulse." When Reeve projected the combined data onto a three-dimensional model of the Antarctic crust, silence filled the virtual room. The origin point wasn't random. It sat directly above one of the planet's oldest and least studied geological scars, a buried impact basin known as Dome 8, estimated to be over 200 million years old. They stared at the visualization, speechless. Beneath the frozen continent, under 4 kilometers of ice and another 20 of solid rock, something was moving inside an ancient crater. "Could it be an active magma plume?" one researcher asked. "Then why the periodicity?" Voss replied. "No magma pulse repeats with such precision." The conversation ended with no conclusion, only a shared unease that something unprecedented was unfolding far below the surface. That night, Reeve opened his encrypted server to review the latest seismic updates. The pulse was still there, steady as ever, beating from the heart of the world like a slow, deliberate drum. At 3:17 Universal Time Coordinated, it stopped. Every instrument across the southern hemisphere fell silent at once. Then, exactly 17 hours and 21 minutes later, it began again, stronger than before. And this time, the signal carried an overtone none of them had heard before. A faint, secondary oscillation rising in frequency, like something was trying to break through. Part 3. The Pattern Beneath the Ice. By the end of March 2028, the global scientific community was divided. Half insisted that the pulse was nothing more than an obscure geological resonance, the product of thermal stress or subglacial fluid migration. The other half, quieter but far more uneasy, suspected that something deeper was at work. To break the stalemate, the European Space Agency authorized a special remote imaging project, Operation Aletheia, named after the Greek word for truth. Its goal was simple: to map the source region beneath the Antarctic ice sheet using every available sensor on Earth and in orbit. Within weeks, satellites from NASA, ESA, and JAXA were reprogrammed to focus their radar arrays on the Gamburtsev subglacial mountains, a buried range hidden under 4 kilometers of solid ice. It was one of the few places on Earth completely untouched by drilling, a world locked away for over 30 million years. At the same time, on-site teams deployed a new generation of autonomous drones capable of penetrating deep crevasses and relaying high-resolution sonar data back to orbit. Each drone carried a small atomic clock for synchronization, critical for detecting tiny, rhythmic oscillations in the ice. What they found defied expectations. Initial radar sweeps revealed an enormous subglacial basin, roughly 280 kilometers across, sealed beneath a thick dome of ancient ice. At its center lay a near-perfect circle, sharply defined and tens of kilometers wide. Its geometry was too regular to be random: smooth edges, concentric layers, and a core depression forming an almost symmetrical ring. At first, analysts assumed they were looking at the remains of an asteroid impact. That would explain the circular form. But when the data from the subsurface radar came back, it told a different story. The structure was hollow. In geophysics, nature rarely builds perfect cavities. Collapsed magma chambers, ice voids, and gas pockets all have irregular boundaries. This one didn't. It was uniform, with walls that reflected sonar more sharply than solid rock, as if lined with something metallic. Reeves' team processed the data overnight, layering seismic and gravimetric maps into a three-dimensional model. When the rendering stabilized, they all fell silent. The structure beneath the ice wasn't a random void. It was an array. Dozens of radial tunnels extended outward from a central hub, each measuring about 3 kilometers wide and 30 long, converging toward the middle like spokes on a wheel. The resemblance to engineered symmetry was uncanny. Dr. Voss, staring at the screen in disbelief, muttered what everyone was thinking. "This looks built." No one responded. The idea was too audacious, a constructed formation 200 million years old, buried under a continent that itself hadn't existed in its current form since Pangaea. Still, the data refused to yield a simpler answer. Every measurable variable, acoustic resonance, density gradient, magnetic reflection, pointed to the same conclusion. This was no ordinary geological structure. And yet, when the team ran electromagnetic scans to identify any artificial materials, the readings came back ambiguous. No clear sign of alloys or composites, only a strange, dense mineral phase unknown to any existing catalog. The next discovery came almost by accident. During a scheduled transmission test, one of the subglacial drones detected a faint electromagnetic echo, a return signal bouncing off something deep within the basin. The frequency matched the harmonic ratio of the pulse. It wasn't a passive structure. It was resonating. To confirm the finding, Reeves' lab synchronized the pulse data with satellite magnetometer readings. The match was exact. Every seismic beat corresponded to a brief, measurable surge in the magnetic field directly above the basin. The Earth's crust was behaving like a transmitter powered from within. Within days, the discovery reached agencies far beyond the scientific sphere. The National Geospatial Intelligence Agency in the United States issued a formal data embargo, classifying all orbital imaging from that sector as restricted pending review. Russia followed suit, blocking its Vostok outpost from transmitting seismic updates. Officially, it was a matter of international coordination. Unofficially, it was containment. Still, leaks trickled out. A technician at the South Pole Observatory uploaded a corrupted dataset before the lockdown, a fragment of raw radar telemetry showing faint movement within the central cavity. The motion was cyclical, expanding and contracting by a fraction of a meter every 17 hours, in perfect sync with the pulse. When the image reached the scientific underground forums, theories exploded. Some claimed it was a massive geothermal vent. Others speculated it was a remnant of a prehistoric civilization, a monument buried by time. And a few, the boldest, suggested it was not of human origin at all. Dr. Reeve refused to entertain that idea. "We're scientists," he told his team. "We deal in data, not myths." But privately, he was less sure. He had run simulations to test every known natural cause, from tidal stresses to mantle convection. None produced the regularity or energy signature of the pulse. And then there was the most disturbing finding of all, the temperature. Data from the drone sensors indicated that the cavity's interior was warmer than the surrounding rock by nearly 12 degrees Celsius. That might not sound like much, but at such depth it was anomalous. There was no geothermal gradient that could explain a localized heat pocket of that magnitude. Something was producing energy down there. In early April, Reeve received a message from an anonymous address. Just a single line of text. "Stop probing the resonance. It's reacting." He assumed it was a hoax, but when he checked the transmission metadata, it originated from a relay node in Antarctica, one registered to a research station that had been decommissioned since 2016. That same night, seismic stations across the continent registered a subtle change in the waveform. The pulse was no longer symmetrical. It had shifted into what Reeve described as a beat pattern, a complex interference pattern between two overlapping sources, as if the signal were responding to something. For the first time, the team began to ask a question that had, until then, been unthinkable. What if the pulse wasn't just a geological phenomenon? What if it was a signal and something down there had just heard us listening? Part 4, the lockdown. By April 2028, The pulse had become the quiet obsession of every major research and intelligence agency on the planet, though officially it didn't exist. The International Seismic Consortium stopped publishing raw Antarctic data. Satellite networks were recalibrated, and a temporary imaging blackout was issued across a 400-kilometer zone centered on the Gamburtsev Basin. Even public satellites, those used by universities and civilian observatories, were instructed to ignore coordinates south of 75 degrees latitude. No one ever explained why. On paper, it was just another case of bandwidth prioritization. But inside the closed corridors of the European Space Operations Center, the language was very different. Engineers received urgent instructions to encrypt all telemetry related to Operation Alethea. A new classification appeared on internal documents, Level Arc 7, a designation that hadn't been used since the discovery of the first gravitational wave event decades earlier. In Washington, a joint task force was assembled under the pretext of geophysical stability monitoring. It was led by a man whose name didn't appear on any official roster, Colonel Raymond Harker, Defense Intelligence. His orders were explicit: assess whether the anomaly posed any threat to communications, navigation, or strategic assets. But Harker wasn't a geologist. His background was in signal intelligence. His team specialized in identifying patterns in radio transmissions, deep space telemetry, and encrypted communications. The fact that they were being assigned to an underground seismic event made little sense, unless someone believed the pulse wasn't natural. At the same time, on the other side of the world, the Russian Antarctic Division suddenly recalled its scientists from the Vostok and Mirny stations. Publicly, they cited logistical concerns. Privately, an intercepted diplomatic cable leaked weeks later revealed a different motive: energetic interference detected. Maintain distance until cause verified. Within 2 months, international cooperation in Antarctic research, one of the few remaining symbols of peaceful scientific unity, had fractured. Every nation was now operating behind closed doors. Dr. Tomas Reeve, who had led the original analysis, found himself abruptly cut off from his own project. His data access credentials were revoked. His communications redirected through a government proxy. When he protested, he received a formal letter from the European Polar Research Institute citing national security considerations. The letter was unsigned. Meanwhile, Dr. Eleanor Voss went dark. Her colleagues later said she left Geneva with no explanation, taking her private research archives with her. The last anyone heard from her was a brief message to Reeve: "Don't let them turn this into a weapon." He didn't know what she meant. Not yet. Then, in late April, the pulse changed again. Seismic sensors that had been left running autonomously began recording a new pattern: a high-frequency tremor layered on top of the original rhythm, forming an amplitude modulation, like a carrier wave carrying encoded data. When decoded into an audio spectrum, it produced a sequence of harmonic tones eerily reminiscent of structured sound, a pattern of rising and falling frequencies spaced with mathematical precision. To Harker's intelligence team, it looked like transmission. They immediately classified the data as signal read, a designation used for potential non-terrestrial communications. The file was transmitted to a secure facility in Maryland for analysis. Publicly, the event was logged as localized icequake activity. But internally, the debate was heating up. If the pulse was indeed a signal, who or what was sending it? And why from beneath one of the most isolated and inaccessible regions on Earth? The first briefing to NATO scientific advisors outlined 3 hypotheses: geothermal feedback, an unknown interaction between magma plumes and the deep crust, producing electromagnetic resonance; technogenic interference, a human-made artifact, possibly an abandoned Cold War installation reacting to geological stress; non-terrestrial artifact, an anomalous structure of unknown origin, generating or amplifying a modulated signal. The third option was never meant to be spoken aloud. But once it appeared on an official document, the world of quiet scientific speculation was over. By early May, military assets began to move. The U.S. Air Force dispatched two C-17 cargo planes to McMurdo Station carrying classified equipment. Satellite images later showed what looked like portable drilling rigs and electromagnetic field generators being unloaded under tarpaulins. Officially, they were climate monitoring systems. Unofficially, they were part of Project Helios, a joint U.S. European effort to probe the pulse directly from the surface. The plan was ambitious. Deploy a high-power electromagnetic resonator capable of emitting controlled bursts of energy down into the crust. The goal was to ping the source and listen for any response, a seismic echo, a reflection, anything. But there was a risk. No one knew how the pulse might react to active stimulation. When Reeve learned about the experiment through one of his remaining contacts at ESA, he was furious. "We don't even understand what we're listening to," he said, "and they're trying to talk back." The first Helios test took place on May 19, 2028. The resonator emitted a directed low-frequency pulse, a controlled seismic knock, into the Gamburtsev Basin. For 17 hours, nothing happened. Then, almost on schedule, the pulse responded. The returning waveform was not the same as before. Its amplitude spiked tenfold, and its frequency split into 3 overlapping bands. The ice above the source zone flexed, not by centimeters but meters. Satellites recorded a brief, localized uplift of the surface ice sheet, as though something below were shifting upward. At McMurdo, instruments went haywire. Magnetometers overloaded, communications blacked out, and the aurora above the southern pole flared bright enough to be visible from New Zealand. Then, as suddenly as it began, everything stopped. The next day, an emergency communique circulated between defense agencies. Containment protocol initiated. All future emissions prohibited. The official explanation given to the public was a solar flare anomaly. No one outside classified circles ever heard about the Helios experiment again. But for those who had seen the raw data, the message was clear. Something under the ice had heard us, and for one brief moment it had answered. Part 5, the return signal decoding what answered back. When the Helios test was conducted, the official goal was to provoke a measurable echo, something quantifiable, controllable, explainable. What it produced instead was chaos. For nearly 40 minutes after the initial emission, every seismic sensor across the southern hemisphere detected violent fluctuations. The pulse, once steady and rhythmic, fractured into a cascade of overlapping frequencies. It was as if the continent itself were singing, not in random noise, but in chords. At first, the response was dismissed as feedback, an artifact of the Helios transmitter itself. But when engineers checked the logs, they found that the equipment had shut down after the first 10 seconds. The remaining 2,300 seconds of data came entirely from the ground. The Earth had answered back. Inside a sealed laboratory at the European Space Operations Center in Darmstadt, a small team of analysts worked through the night to isolate the returning frequencies. Among them was Dr. Meilin Zhao, a data physicist whose work on gravitational wave resonance had earned her a reputation for finding order in apparent chaos. Zhao began by converting the seismic data into the audio spectrum, a standard trick for identifying harmonics. The result was chilling. Beneath the low rumble of the crustal resonance, a pattern emerged, a sequence of tones rising and falling in intervals of precise mathematical ratios. 3 to 5 to 8, 5 to 8 to 13, 8 hours 13 minutes and 21 seconds. It was the Fibonacci sequence, the same pattern found throughout nature, from spiral galaxies to the growth of shells and flowers. Zhao stared at the readout, speechless. Coincidences happen in noise, but not like this, not with such persistence across multiple channels and sensors. She ran the data through a Fourier transform, decomposing the waveform into its constituent frequencies. Each harmonic peak corresponded to an integer ratio of the base pulse, and those ratios formed geometric relationships that, when plotted in 3 dimensions, outlined a shape. It wasn't random. It was a spiral, expanding outward in perfect logarithmic proportion. When Zhao presented her findings to the review committee, the response was immediate discomfort. Pattern recognition bias, one of the senior analysts said. You're seeing what you expect to see. But she wasn't the only one seeing it. Across the Atlantic, at the U.S. National Geospatial Analysis Lab, Colonel Harker's Signal Intelligence Division had performed its own reconstruction using independent data. Their visualizations looked nearly identical. The official report, marked Top Secret, Eyes Only, concluded that the return signal exhibited structural encoding inconsistent with known natural processes. In simpler terms, it was information. The question was, from where? One theory, quickly suppressed but impossible to ignore, was that the Helios pulse had awakened or disturbed a buried energy structure. A self-regulating mechanism, dormant for millennia, now reacting to electromagnetic stimulation. Harker's analysts went further. Using the timestamp delays between the initial Helios emission and the returning harmonics, they triangulated the approximate depth of origin. The source was located 24.6 kilometers below the surface, right at the center of the circular basin previously mapped by Reeves' team. That depth placed it well beneath the crust inside the upper mantle, an impossible location for any functioning structure. Yet the data were unequivocal. As the team dug deeper, a second discovery emerged. Embedded in the returning signal were microbursts, brief spikes of amplitude, each exactly 0.731 seconds apart. To the untrained eye, they looked like noise. But Zhao noticed something remarkable. When converted into binary, high amplitude as 1, low amplitude as 0, the pattern repeated every 144 bits. It wasn't random. It was a repeating digital code. Zhao fed the sequence into a basic checksum algorithm used for error detection. The output didn't yield any known encoding standard, but when she converted the binary into spectral color values and visualized them, the results stunned her. Against a black background, a faint image appeared, concentric arcs intersecting at a single point, like a schematic or a map. When Reeves saw the visualization, his first reaction was disbelief. "That's just digital noise rendered into art," he said. But Zhao shook her head. "No. The ratios are consistent with the harmonic frequencies of the pulse. This isn't art. It's structure." News of the decoded image spread through classified networks within days. By early June, the United Nations Office for Outer Space Affairs, a body that rarely made headlines, quietly convened an emergency session in Vienna. The meeting was not recorded, but attendees later described an atmosphere of thinly veiled panic. For the first time in history, humanity might have received an information-bearing signal from within its own planet. Not from space, not from the stars, but from beneath the crust itself. The implications were staggering. If it was an artificial construct, who built it and when? Geological evidence placed the ice sheet's formation at roughly 34 million years ago. Any structure beneath it would have to predate that, perhaps dating back to a time before mammals had even evolved into their modern forms. The more the data was analyzed, the stranger it became. The encoded pattern wasn't stable. Every cycle of the pulse subtly altered the signal, as if it were adapting, evolving, or perhaps responding to the observation itself. Zhao ran one final simulation. What if the pulse wasn't merely a transmission but a feedback system, something that emitted energy when stimulated, then recalibrated itself based on the returning input? Her model predicted a terrifying possibility. The structure was not just alive in a mechanical sense. It was interactive. When the first Helios pulse reached it, it had replied. And since then, the amplitude had been increasing with every cycle. It was learning how to talk back. By mid-June, electromagnetic anomalies spread beyond Antarctica. Satellites passing over the southern hemisphere recorded transient distortions in the ionosphere, faint ripples spreading outward in expanding rings. They aligned perfectly with the timing of the pulse. It was no longer just an Antarctic event. The planet itself seemed to be resonating in sympathy. At 3:17 Universal Time coordinated on June 22nd, seismic monitors in Chile, South Africa, and Tasmania all detected the pulse simultaneously, synchronized across 3 continents. Whatever was buried beneath the ice had gone global. Part 6. Resonance, when the Earth began to sing. By the time June gave way to July, The pulse was no longer a secret confined to laboratories or classified cables. Its effects had become impossible to ignore. In Chile's Atacama Desert, one of the driest and most stable geological regions on Earth, the seismic sensors at ALMA Observatory began detecting rhythmic oscillations, faint, steady, and perfectly matched to the Antarctic pulse. The same pattern appeared in South Africa's Karoo Basin, then again in Tasmania's subcrustal stations. The Earth was vibrating in harmony with something deep beneath the ice. At first, the changes were subtle fluctuations in magnetometers, low-frequency hums detectable only with specialized instruments. But within days, pilots over the southern hemisphere began reporting interference with navigation systems. Compasses drifted, satellite links dropped out for minutes at a time, and auroras, once confined to polar skies, began appearing over latitudes where they had never been seen before. When NASA's ACE satellite recorded a sudden spike in geomagnetic flux without any corresponding solar activity, analysts were baffled. The sun was calm, yet Earth's magnetic field was convulsing as though struck by invisible waves. Somewhere in Geneva, Thomas Reeve stared at the magnetometer plots in disbelief. He had spent months studying the Antarctic anomaly, but now the lines on his screen told a different story. The entire planet had become part of the resonance. "This isn't a local event anymore," he said to himself. "It's a system response." He wasn't wrong. Across the world, instruments began to register strange harmonics in unexpected places. Ocean buoys, deep-sea microphones, even the resonant cavities of underground tunnels. The pulse was infiltrating everything solid, liquid, and magnetic. When data from these diverse systems were compiled, one chilling realization emerged. The frequencies were converging. What had begun as a single deep rhythm beneath Antarctica was now accompanied by a faint overtone, a secondary harmonic creeping upward into the range of human hearing. At first, only sensitive instruments could detect it. Then came the reports from the field. Technicians at coastal research stations began complaining of a low hum at the edge of perception, a sound that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. In some places, it was described as a drone. In others, as a deep, resonant chord that made the air itself tremble. It lasted only a few seconds at a time, but those who heard it described a strange, almost emotional effect, as though the sound wasn't just being heard but felt. By mid-July, social media exploded with speculation. Residents from Cape Town to southern Australia uploaded recordings of a mysterious global hum. News outlets dismissed it as infrastructure noise or atmospheric refraction, but acousticians who analyzed the clips noticed something uncanny. The frequencies matched the seismic waveform of the pulse almost perfectly. Reeve and Zhao exchanged encrypted messages. They both knew what it meant. The resonance was coupling through the planet's crust, transforming seismic energy into acoustic vibration. In simple terms, the Earth was beginning to sing. But not all of its songs were peaceful. At the McMurdo station, the last functioning Helios monitoring team began experiencing electrical disturbances. Batteries discharged unexpectedly, hard drives failed, and digital clocks began losing time in precise sync with each new pulse cycle. The entire outpost seemed trapped in a rhythmic electrical flux. Then came the dreams. It began with the technicians who spent the most time monitoring the live signal feed. They reported vivid, recurring visions, vast geometric patterns of light, spiraling shapes, and a faint, melodic tone that echoed long after waking. Medical evaluations found no signs of sleep deprivation or psychosis. But every subject described the same imagery. When Zhao heard of it, she ran a cross-analysis between the reported dream frequencies and the audiospectral profile of the pulse. The match was exact. Somehow, the resonance was not only affecting matter, it was interacting with the human nervous system. In a confidential memo later leaked to the public, she wrote, "We're dealing with a phenomenon that bridges physics and biology. The pulse is no longer just a sound in the earth. It's inside us." Meanwhile, governments continued to suppress open discussion. The official explanation remained atmospheric phenomena related to solar activity. But the world's instruments told another story. A slow, measurable synchronization of Earth's natural resonances, Schumann frequencies, with the new harmonic rising from Antarctica. In ancient myth, Schumann resonance was sometimes likened to the heartbeat of the planet, the electromagnetic oscillation trapped between the Earth and the ionosphere. For centuries, it had been steady 7.83 Hz, a gentle whisper of lightning and weather. But in July 2028, it began to drift upward, subtly at first, then unmistakably, sinking closer and closer to the frequency of the pulse. Zhao plotted the two curves together. They converged into a single point projected to meet on August 1, 2028. If her model was correct, the Earth's natural electromagnetic field and the Antarctic resonance would enter harmonic lock, a moment when both frequencies would amplify each other instead of canceling out. Reeves stared at the projection. "If that happens," he said quietly, "we'll be amplifying whatever this is, across the entire planet." No one knew what that meant. Some scientists predicted nothing more than a transient electromagnetic storm, spectacular but harmless. Others feared it could induce global power disruptions or even trigger seismic instability. But Zhao's instinct told her something else entirely. "Resonance," she said, "is communication. If two systems synchronize, they start to share information. And if the Earth was about to resonate in harmony with whatever slept beneath the Antarctic ice, then maybe, just maybe, the planet was about to listen." At 3:17 Universal Time coordinated on July 30th, the pulse frequency began to rise, not by accident but with measurable acceleration, as though anticipating the approaching synchronization. Zhao recorded her final entry before communications cut off. "We are no longer the observers. We are the receivers." Part 7, Convergence, the day the frequencies aligned. The world did not know that August 1, 2028, would be remembered as the day the Earth changed. No alarms were sounded, no press releases issued. The countdown to the convergence existed only in the data streams of a few scientists who were no longer allowed to speak. At 3 o'clock Universal Time coordinated, the Antarctic ice sheet lay in perfect silence under the pale, unending twilight of winter. Temperatures dropped below -70, and the winds were motionless, an eerie stillness, as if the entire continent were holding its breath. Then, at 3:17 Universal Time coordinated, exactly as Zhao's model had predicted, the convergence began. Sensors across the world recorded a simultaneous phase lock between Earth's Schumann resonance and the Antarctic pulse. The two frequencies merged with mathematical precision, creating a singular standing wave that wrapped the entire planet like a web of invisible light. For 7 minutes and 24 seconds, the Earth hummed as one. To the untrained ear, it was inaudible. But for those near the poles, deep in the mountains, or near the ocean floor sensors, it manifested as a pressure in the chest. A physical vibration, subtle yet unmistakable. Animals felt it first. Migratory birds changed course mid-flight, whales began breaching in strange synchrony, and seismic sensors picked up simultaneous microquakes across multiple tectonic plates. Movements too coordinated to be random. Then came the light. Above the Antarctic Circle, the sky ignited in silent auroras, spirals of green and violet, expanding outward in vast geometric patterns, as though tracing invisible circuits in the atmosphere. The same phenomenon appeared moments later above the equator, then in the northern hemisphere, forming a global auroral ring. It was the first time in recorded history that auroras encircled the entire planet simultaneously. In McMurdo Station, the remaining Helios monitors watched in awe as their instruments went off the scale. Magnetometers maxed out, data streams froze, and every digital display flickered between static and perfect darkness. The pulse had grown too strong to measure. But something else was happening, something entirely unanticipated. When the resonance peaked, satellite telemetry showed a measurable reduction in the distance between Earth's magnetic poles, as though the field itself were collapsing inward, tightening. For a brief window, the planet's magnetic geometry became almost perfectly symmetrical. Reeve, monitoring from Geneva, watched the data unfold on his screen. He had expected noise, interference, chaos. Instead, he saw order, lines converging, harmonics aligning, energy concentrating at a single geographic point, the Gamburtsev Basin. The source had stabilized. Then, for the first time since the beginning of the phenomenon, the pulse stopped. Every instrument, seismic, electromagnetic, acoustic, fell silent. For a full 11 minutes, the Earth's systems held a perfect stillness unlike anything ever recorded. Even the background hum of natural seismic noise, the heartbeat of the planet, disappeared. It was as though the Earth itself had paused. At exactly 3:28 Universal Time Coordinated, the silence broke. A single, deep-frequency wave emerged from Antarctica, traveling outward in concentric rings. Unlike the chaotic harmonics before, this one was pure, a tone so low and so stable that it passed through rock, water, and atmosphere without distortion. It encircled the planet in less than 8 minutes. In laboratories worldwide, sensors lit up. The waveform carried modulation, faint but structured, repeating every 144 seconds. The same number that Zhao had found in the earlier binary code. When she decoded the new data, her software returned a simple output, a grid of coordinates, latitude, longitude, and depth. The coordinates pointed not to Antarctica, but to 12 locations scattered evenly around the globe, from the Pacific Ocean Trench to the deserts of Namibia, the Himalayas, and the floor of the Atlantic. Each coordinate lay at the intersection of major tectonic boundaries, as though marking nodes in a planetary network. Reeve double-checked the data 3 times before whispering to himself, "This isn't just one structure." Zhao's reply came seconds later. "It's a system." They began cross-referencing historical anomalies, unexplained magnetic deviations, gravity irregularities, and deep crust echo zones. One by one, the coordinates matched ancient mysteries. The underwater ridge near Easter Island, the unexplored cavern systems beneath Siberia, and a gravitational anomaly deep below the Atlantic mid-ocean ridge. Each point had shown unexplained seismic quiet zones, places where sound and vibration seemed to vanish, absorbed by something below. The implication was staggering. The Antarctic pulse had not been an isolated anomaly at all. It had been a master signal, the central oscillator of a global network buried deep within the Earth, dormant until now. But what kind of system could lie beneath an entire planet? And why had it suddenly chosen to awaken? Zhao ran a time series simulation using all recorded data since January. The model revealed a strange truth. The signal's amplitude and structure were increasing according to a geometric progression. Not random growth, but exponential synchronization. Whatever the buried network was, it had been preparing for this convergence for months, perhaps for eons. At 4 o'clock Universal Time Coordinated, the pulse ceased again. But this time it didn't return. Instead, seismic sensors detected faint tremors at each of the 12 global coordinates, perfectly synchronized. Then, in every location, deep below the crust, an echo began, not a reflection, but a reply. A sound, impossibly faint yet structured, spreading outward in perfect symmetry. 12 voices, rising together in resonance. And from the Antarctic heart of the system, a final low-frequency burst, a sequence of harmonic steps climbing toward audibility. When converted into sound, it resembled a chord. It was as if the planet had just taken its first breath in millions of years. In a secure data center near Geneva, Reeve stared at the waveform, trembling. "We've triggered something global," he said. Zhao looked at him, her voice steady but cold. "No," she whispered. "It's not us who triggered it. It's been waiting for the Earth to be ready." Part 8: The Network, Mapping the 12 Sites. In the first weeks after the global convergence, the world's attention quietly shifted toward 12 coordinates, 12 silent points scattered like constellations across the planet's crust. Each one pulsed faintly with the same low-frequency resonance, perfectly synchronized with the Antarctic core. To the public, there was nothing unusual happening. Flights continued, the stock markets hummed, and the world spun on, oblivious to the slow awakening beneath it. But for those who had seen the data, a single realization consumed their thoughts. The Earth was now a living network. When the coordinates were plotted on a global projection, a pattern emerged, 12 nodes connected by invisible arcs, forming a near-perfect geodesic symmetry. The geometry wasn't random. The nodes corresponded almost exactly to vertices of a dodecahedron, one of the 5 Platonic solids, a shape that had fascinated mathematicians, philosophers, and mystics for millennia. Zhao, normally a rationalist, found herself staring at the globe in silence. "It's the geometry of equilibrium," she murmured. "The most stable way to distribute stress inside a sphere." Reeve wasn't so sure. "Or," he countered, "it's the geometry of design." Each site carried a unique seismic fingerprint, slightly offset from the others but all in harmonic relationship with the Antarctic pulse. When mapped through resonance interference, the nodes connected in a web that seemed to extend through the mantle itself, a planetary lattice of energy transfer that no known geological process could explain. One of the first active investigations took place at the Pacific Node, located deep beneath the Tonga Trench. An unmanned oceanic probe, designed for pressure depths of up to 11 kilometers, was deployed by a joint Japanese-American research vessel. It descended through total darkness, guided by sonar. At a depth of 9,800 meters, the probe's sonar returned an image unlike anything ever recorded in marine geology. A vast, perfectly circular depression in the ocean floor, nearly 5 kilometers wide, lined with smooth, reflective mineral walls. The formation was too symmetrical to be natural. Worse, the sonar detected faint rhythmic oscillations emanating from within, low-frequency pulses identical to those recorded beneath Antarctica. The team transmitted the data to shore, then lost contact with the probe. The final frames showed its depth gauge rising, as if it were being pushed upward by a force from below. The next day, seismic sensors in Tonga recorded a small, localized quake, but no tsunami followed. The water column above the trench remained eerily calm. Thousands of kilometers away, in the deserts of Namibia, a second team led by an independent geophysicist named Dr. Kareem Dower uncovered an equally disturbing find. Beneath an ancient dry lakebed known as Etoshapan, ground-penetrating radar revealed a massive cavity shaped like a hexagonal dome, 20 kilometers across, with a reflective core in the center. The structure's dimensions matched those of the Antarctic basin to within 2%. When Dower's team drilled a shallow borehole to extract sediment samples, they found something impossible: grains of metallic crystal embedded in the ancient clay, composed of an alloy never before documented in nature. It was resistant to melting even at 3,000 degrees Celsius and exhibited weak magnetic polarity, as if it retained an orientation toward the south magnetic pole, one that hadn't existed for millions of years. "This alloy was magnetized under a different Earth," Dower said quietly during his recorded field notes. "One that might have looked nothing like the world we know." At the same time, deep within the Himalayas, Indian and Chinese research teams investigating high-altitude seismic anomalies discovered that the pulse there was amplifying local magnetic fields, subtly altering compass readings, sometimes by as much as 5 degrees. When they compared timing data from all global sites, they realized something astonishing. Every 12 hours, energy seemed to move between the nodes in a specific sequence, like current flowing through a circuit. It wasn't random activation. It was rotation. Zhao's data models began to make sense of it. "This isn't a cluster of independent anomalies," she said. "It's one system, a distributed structure using the Earth itself as its medium." But that raised the most frightening question of all: what was it designed to do? The most conservative theory suggested an ancient, self-regulating geothermal system, perhaps a natural planetary stabilizer maintaining crustal balance over geological timescales. The more speculative voices proposed something far stranger: a relic of a prehistoric civilization or even an engineered biosphere safeguard, buried deep to protect against extinction-level events. Still, there were details no theory could comfortably explain. Satellite gravimetry revealed that at each node, the density of the crust was subtly lower, as though hollowed out, and that these voids collectively formed an interconnected network running along the major fault lines. When mapped in 3D, The resulting structure resembled a neural web. Zhao presented the model at a private symposium in Zurich. The presentation was brief, but its impact devastating. "We're looking at a planetary-scale feedback system," she said. "One that operates across geological, electromagnetic, and possibly biological domains. The Earth might not just be supporting life, it might be built to sustain it." Her words spread through encrypted research channels like wildfire. Some called it pseudoscience. Others saw it as heretical. But among the scientists who had seen the pulse firsthand, a strange consensus was forming. The Earth was not simply a planet. It was an organism, or at least the remains of something designed to function like one. When the press finally caught wind of the classified research in mid-September, it was already too late to contain. A few journalists broke the story under the headline, "The Earth Network Theory." The reaction was instant disbelief, followed by fascination, then fear. Conspiracy channels twisted the findings into doomsday predictions. Environmental groups declared it proof that the planet was waking up in defense against humanity's damage. Governments, however, responded in a far more pragmatic way, by sending expeditions to every known node. Each site was now under military jurisdiction. Scientists worked under guard, data transmissions heavily filtered, public statements banned. But the resonance continued to rise. In early October, the Antarctic core reactivated, this time at twice its previous amplitude. And across all 12 nodes, the same harmonic signature appeared simultaneously, as if the network had received an internal command. Zhao's final note before her disappearance captured the unease of everyone involved. "It's not a signal anymore, it's coordination. Something is synchronizing the planet, and we're not the ones in control." Part 9. The Echo Signs of Intelligence Beneath the Crust. By October 2028, the term Earth Network had entered scientific vocabulary, not through official publication, but through leaks, whispers, and half-redacted reports shared among trusted colleagues. What began as an anomaly had evolved into something that resembled behavior. The pulse no longer came in regular intervals. It now carried structure, modulations, repetitions, and pauses that mirrored linguistic cadence. Something, or someone, appeared to be encoding information into the Earth itself. At first, the changes were subtle. Across the 12 nodes, the signal frequency began to drift, not randomly but following mirrored trajectories. When the Antarctic core emitted a pulse, the other nodes responded milliseconds later, like neurons firing in a global brain. Each response came with a measurable delay proportional to its distance from the Antarctic node, confirming that energy was traveling through the mantle in a coherent pattern. But more intriguingly, the phase difference between these responses wasn't static. It oscillated. Zhao, before vanishing from public communication, had described it best. "It's as though the Earth is testing latency, timing its own heartbeat." In mid-October, new data began pouring in from deep-sea hydrophones in the Pacific. The instruments were designed to detect whale songs and underwater seismic noise, but instead they recorded something wholly unexpected: rhythmic tonal bursts spaced in the exact same interval as the pulse. When analyzed, the tones showed frequency modulation similar to human speech, though far below the audible range. Converted to sound, it was haunting. A deep, undulating pattern, rising and falling in intervals that evoked melody, not chaos. Acoustic specialists called it the echo. For days, the recordings were dismissed as equipment malfunction or feedback from the seafloor. But when multiple hydrophones thousands of kilometers apart captured the same signal at the same time, the evidence became undeniable. It was the same tone emitted by the Antarctic node, but reflected, processed, and returned from the others. Reeve, still coordinating what remained of the Helios data group, plotted the time differences between the echoes. The intervals formed repeating numeric sequences, prime numbers, Fibonacci ratios, and simple geometric constants like pi and phi. It was too deliberate to be coincidence. He wrote in his private log, "We are hearing mathematics spoken through stone." At the same time, the anomalies began to interact with human technology in unexpected ways. Satellites flying over the nodes experienced spontaneous data corruption. Not random but structured, clusters of ones and zeros forming repeating binary patterns. One encryption engineer, after analyzing a corrupted telemetry file, discovered a chilling fact. The damaged data contained a compressed version of the same spiral geometry Zhao had decoded months before. In other words, the interference was not destroying data, it was overwriting it with a message. Governments reacted with predictable urgency. By late October, international communication satellites were rerouted to avoid passing directly over node coordinates. Civilian aircraft were instructed to alter flight paths. Officially, the reason was magnetic instability. Unofficially, no one wanted to risk what might happen if human systems continued to interact with the pulse. And yet, even with all these precautions, the effects were spreading. Around the Indian Ocean, long-wave radio operators began reporting unexplained harmonics bleeding into their frequencies, deep, resonant tones that repeated in complex intervals. Listeners described a strange sensation while monitoring them, a feeling of pressure behind the eyes, or an emotional heaviness that seemed to defy explanation. Soon after, something even more inexplicable occurred. At 3 separate geological stations in Namibia, Chile, and the Himalayas, seismic sensors recorded localized distortions that did not match any natural model. The waves didn't move outward from a point, as with ordinary tremors. Instead, they folded inward, converging toward the node, as if something below were absorbing vibration instead of emitting it. This phenomenon repeated for days. Then came the data spike. At 2:11 Universal Time coordinated on October 29th, the Antarctic node transmitted the strongest pulse yet, nearly 50 times the amplitude of its initial signal. Across all 12 sites, instruments went offline simultaneously. But before they did, they captured a sequence that would redefine everything. A burst of 12 synchronized waves, each modulated by a unique harmonic pattern, 12 voices, perfectly distinct yet forming a unified chord. When the patterns were translated into frequency ratios, they corresponded precisely to 12-tone equal temperament, the mathematical foundation of human music. It was communication through resonance, not random, not geological, deliberate. The data stunned Reeve. "It's teaching us its language," he whispered. To test the theory, he and a handful of surviving helioscientists transmitted a controlled test tone, a simple harmonic sequence matching the previous modulation pattern. They waited. 3 hours later, the Antarctic node replied. The returning wave carried the same tone, but inverted, phase-shifted by exactly 180 degrees, as though acknowledging the call. The pattern repeated twice more, then fell silent. Reeve was pale when he sent the report to his remaining colleagues. "It's not a coincidence," he wrote. "The signal is interacting. It recognizes input." From that moment onward, the world's understanding of the pulse changed. It was no longer a mere physical anomaly or global resonance phenomenon. It was a dialogue. But if the Earth was speaking, the next question was inevitable: who or what was listening beneath the crust? Because 2 days after that first confirmed reply, one of the deep ocean nodes did something unprecedented. It moved. Satellite gravimetry registered a vertical displacement. Slight, just 3 centimeters, but unmistakable, as though a massive structure beneath the seafloor had shifted position. For a moment, the echo pattern across all nodes faltered, then resynchronized to a slightly faster rhythm. Reeve's message to Zhao that night was brief and terrified. "It's not just alive. It's waking up." Part 10, Awakening, the Movement Beneath the Seas. In the first week of November 2028, every oceanographic institute on Earth recorded the same inexplicable event: a synchronized fluctuation in global sea levels, a rise of just under 3 centimeters, lasting fewer than 7 minutes. No tides, no storm surges, no gravitational anomalies from the moon or Sunday, just a gentle, planet-wide swelling and retreat. At first, it was dismissed as a data calibration error. But when the same pattern appeared again, precisely 17 hours and 21 minutes later, scientists recognized the signature immediately. The timing was identical to the pulse. Somewhere beneath the world's oceans, the planetary network was shifting. The Tonga Trench node, already infamous for swallowing the unmanned probe months earlier, became the focus of renewed attention. Using long-range sonar, researchers detected a subtle but continuous low-frequency vibration emanating from deep below the trench, a vibration that wasn't seismic, but mechanical. It repeated every 90 seconds, modulating slowly in amplitude like a machine warming up after a long sleep. At 3:17 Universal Time, coordinated on November 6th, the vibration stopped. Then, a single massive pulse erupted from the trench, not seismic but acoustic. It traveled through the ocean at supersonic speed, bouncing across continental shelves, detectable by hydrophones from New Zealand to Hawaii. When mapped in time and space, the pulse formed a wavefront pattern expanding outward from Tonga, and 10 minutes later, converging perfectly at the next node in the Indian Ocean. The network had begun transferring energy from one point to another. Zhao, missing from public channels for months, resurfaced briefly through a single encrypted message to Reeve. Energy flow detected between nodes. Mantle resonance increasing. It's activating sequentially, clockwise around the Pacific Ring. This isn't random. It's a boot sequence. That phrase, a boot sequence, spread like wildfire through the scientific underground. It implied that the network wasn't just resonating or reacting, but initializing. Around the same time, unusual readings began appearing in the planet's magnetic field. The South Atlantic anomaly, a region where Earth's magnetic field is weakest, began shrinking. Magnetic intensity rose worldwide, as if the core itself were stabilizing. For centuries, Earth's field had been decaying. Now it was recovering. Whatever was happening beneath the crust seemed to be recharging the planet's magnetic engine. But the effects weren't purely physical. Marine biologists in the Pacific began reporting strange behavior among deep-sea species. Mass migrations from the ocean floor toward shallower depths, as though fleeing something. Whales altered their migratory routes, converging on the South Pole in unprecedented numbers. In one eerie instance, a pod of blue whales followed a perfect spiral formation across the Southern Ocean, a spiral identical in shape to the Fibonacci pattern encoded in the original signal. When confronted with the footage, Reeve said quietly, "It's like they're responding to a call we can't hear." Meanwhile, seismic data continued to show micromovements at all 12 nodes. Each one exhibited a subtle upward displacement, as if immense structures buried kilometers beneath the crust were slowly rising toward the surface. At the Namibian site, gravity measurements showed that the mass beneath the dome had decreased by nearly 2%, meaning whatever was down there wasn't just shifting. It was hollowing out the ground above it. The U.S. Geological Survey attempted to contain the story, attributing local quakes to thermal mantle anomalies. But satellite interferometry told the truth. Every node was expanding, breathing in unison with the Antarctic pulse. By November 10th, tremors began to ripple across the Pacific. They were small, magnitude 3.0, barely perceptible, but their spacing and timing matched the rotation pattern Zhao had described, clockwise activation around the Ring of Fire. At the same time, electromagnetic emissions spiked across the globe. Shortwave radio bands filled with static, GPS signals wavered, and global navigation networks began to desynchronize. It was as if the planet itself was jamming its own technology. Then came the most chilling discovery yet. A deep-sea probe operating off the coast of Chile transmitted its final image before losing contact. A brief sonar snapshot showing an immense structure embedded within the oceanic crust. It was a lattice of arches and pillars, extending beyond the probe's scanning range, perfectly geometric and reflective. Within the image's lower corner, a faint motion blur, something massive moving behind the structure. Engineers assumed a calibration glitch, until the same motion appeared in sonar recordings from 2 other nodes within the hour. The shapes moved with purpose, following the direction of the energy flow. When the signals were processed and converted into visual data, the pattern was unmistakable. 12 dark forms moving through the mantle layer, tracing a circular path beneath the ocean basins. Reeve couldn't contain his disbelief. They're not geological. he said. "They're synchronized objects, each one at a node." Zhao's final transmission confirmed his fears. The network isn't a machine. It's a colony. The implication was staggering. For decades, Earth had been viewed as a closed system, inert, predictable, self-regulating. But what if those self-regulations were the surface symptoms of something far older, a buried biological or synthetic intelligence integrated into the planet itself? The nodes, the lattice, the harmonic pulse, all parts of one distributed entity, dormant for eons beneath the crust. And now, awakened by human interference, it was moving. Across the world, magnetic readings intensified once more, then abruptly leveled off, as though whatever had been rising beneath the oceans had stopped, waiting. Every monitoring station that still had power recorded the same data. The pulse frequency stabilized at exactly 7.83 Hz, the Schumann resonance. The heartbeat of the Earth had synchronized perfectly with its own network. For the first time in recorded history, the planet's natural and artificial harmonics were one. And in that moment of perfect alignment, the upper atmosphere shimmered thin veils of light circling the globe, invisible to the human eye but captured by satellites as faint concentric rings. Zhao's last note, time-stamped minutes before her communication line went dead, read simply, "It's reached equilibrium. Whatever it is, it's awake." Part 11, the signal above, when the sky began to respond. By mid-November 2028, the resonance was no longer confined to the crust or oceans. It had climbed into the air. At first, it appeared as a data anomaly in atmospheric sensors, subtle electromagnetic oscillations at 7.83 Hz, echoing through the ionosphere. That number had always been a constant of nature. The Schumann resonance, the planet's background hum. But now, its amplitude was surging, as though a colossal transmitter were pumping energy upward from below. The auroras that had danced across the skies in August returned, but this time they were different. They didn't shimmer in irregular curtains of green and violet. They pulsed, rhythmically, in time with the pulse. From Antarctica to Alaska, from the Sahara to the Himalayas, witnesses described the same impossible sight. Auroras forming vast, slow-moving spirals, coiling across the heavens like luminous fingerprints. For the first time in history, the sky was resonating with the ground. When satellite observatories attempted to measure the pattern, they discovered something that defied physics. The auroral spirals weren't random atmospheric effects. They were organized into geometric configurations. When plotted from orbit, the shapes aligned perfectly with the 12 nodes mapped across Earth's surface, forming a projection of the same dodecahedral lattice, but now suspended in the ionosphere, thousands of kilometers above. It was as if the planet's interior network had been mirrored in the sky. Reeve, watching the orbital data from Geneva, realized what was happening. The Earth's buried system was using the ionosphere as a resonant amplifier, broadcasting energy into space. The planet itself had become a transmitter. But to transmit what? For days, the signals intensified. Radio telescopes around the world, even those aimed at deep space, began picking up faint rhythmic interference. At first, it was dismissed as noise, until an astrophysicist at the Atacama Array noticed something chilling. The interference was directional. It wasn't radiating randomly into space. It was aimed. When the signal's vector was calculated, it pointed toward a specific region of the sky. A blank patch in the constellation Eridanus, the same region where, decades earlier, astronomers had recorded a faint but unexplained microwave anomaly known as the cold spot. Zhao had mentioned that anomaly in one of her earlier notebooks. Perhaps the pulse isn't reaching out to space. Perhaps it's responding to something that's already there. That line now returned to haunt Reeve. Within hours, observatories began confirming that the upper atmosphere was not just glowing. It was vibrating. Electromagnetic oscillations in the ionosphere created standing waves powerful enough to modulate radio frequencies. For short periods, ordinary AM bands went silent worldwide, replaced by faint, rhythmic clicks spaced precisely 17 hours and 21 minutes apart, the same timing as the original Antarctic signal. To the general public, it was simply another global interference event. To those who knew the history of the pulse, it was confirmation of their deepest fear. The signal wasn't contained anymore. It had entered the sky and possibly space. Then the climate began to change. Weather satellites detected rapid formation of high-altitude cirrus clouds, thin, luminous sheets appearing in regions where moisture was too low to support them. These clouds reflected light differently, scattering it in prismatic halos that followed the same dodecahedral geometry traced by the auroras. Even stranger, ground-based magnetometers recorded localized temperature inversions near the nodes, brief, inexplicable pockets of warmth radiating upward through the atmosphere. It was as if the planet were venting energy or releasing heat stored deep within the mantle. But the most extraordinary discovery came from the James Webb Space Telescope, still operational in its quiet orbit far beyond the Moon's shadow. When its sensors were tuned toward the direction of the auroral emissions, Webb detected faint microwave bursts matching the Earth's resonance frequency, traveling outward from the planet, coherent, structured, and continuous. Earth was speaking into space. Reeves' message to the dwindling Helios network was urgent. The transmission is not random. It's repeating every 12 cycles, same pattern as before, Fibonacci modulation, logarithmic harmonic scaling. It's communicating. But with whom? That question was answered, or perhaps deepened, a week later. On November 22nd, several radio telescopes, including the arrays in Australia, South Africa, and Chile, received a faint, narrowband signal returning from the same direction the Earth's transmission had been aimed. It was delayed by just over 20 minutes, the time it would take for a signal to reach roughly 2 astronomical units away and return. The return signal was weak, almost lost in the noise, but its structure was identical to the Earth's outgoing pulse, inverted in phase, mirrored, as though the call had been acknowledged. In other words, something had replied. For a brief moment, global monitoring networks went haywire. Magnetometers swung wildly, compasses failed, and the auroral spirals brightened, aligning into a single colossal formation centered on the South Pole, a vortex of light visible even from space. Then silence. All instruments flatlined. The pulse vanished. The skies cleared. For the first time in nearly a year, the world was still. Governments declared the event over, blaming it on ionospheric fluctuations caused by solar wind. But Reeve knew better. He had seen the final frame of the ionospheric map before the systems crashed. A spiral descending not upward into space but downward into the Antarctic core. The transmission had been two-way. The Earth had sent a message, received an answer, and now whatever had been sleeping beneath the ice was listening. Zhao's last note, recovered months later from a quarantine data vault, ended with a single line. It wasn't an awakening. It was a handshake. Part 12, The Descent Journey to the Antarctic Core. When the world fell silent after the handshake, governments faced a decision that had no precedent. For months, the pulse had dominated classified briefings, divided scientific institutions, and stirred global unease. Now, with the network apparently dormant, some saw a chance to close the book, to declare the anomaly contained, a mystery best left buried. But others wanted answers. In early December 2028, under the cover of a multinational geophysical research initiative, a small expedition was assembled to penetrate the Antarctic core. It was called Project Acheron. Officially, it was a collaboration between the European Polar Research Institute and the United States Geological Survey. In reality, it was a joint operation between multiple intelligence agencies, an attempt to confirm whether the so-called Antarctic basin was natural, mechanical, or something else entirely. The project was led by Dr. Thomas Reeve. He had resisted at first, arguing that direct interference might reawaken the resonance. But after Zhao's disappearance and the fading of the pulse, he was haunted by one unresolved question. What had Earth been talking to? If answers existed, they would be found at the source. The Acheron team consisted of 8 people, 4 scientists, 2 engineers, and 2 security specialists. Their base of operations was an isolated research camp 600 kilometers inland, near the coordinates of the original seismic anomaly. From orbit, It appeared as a cluster of white domes against an endless white void. But beneath the ice, their drilling platform extended down through 4 kilometers of glacial strata. At 3:17 Universal Time coordinated on December 4th, the time that had become synonymous with the pulse, the drilling began. The borehole was narrow, designed for minimal surface disturbance, using a hybrid thermal-mechanical rig that vaporized ice and extracted pressurized meltwater for analysis. For the first 3 days, nothing unusual appeared. Then, at a depth of 3,902 meters, the sensors detected a sudden drop in density, the unmistakable sign of a hollow chamber below. The sonar imaging that followed stunned everyone. The cavity wasn't irregular like a melt pocket. It was a perfect hemisphere, 2 kilometers wide, with smooth, reflective walls. Even more astonishing, the interior emitted a faint magnetic field of its own, pulsing once every 17 hours and 21 minutes. The pulse had returned. When the team lowered a probe into the chamber, its sensors began transmitting rhythmic data spikes. Not random noise, but precise numeric intervals, repeating in Fibonacci ratios. Reeves stared at the readings. "It's the same modulation," he whispered. "It's still talking." The probe descended another 100 meters before its camera feed activated. What it revealed was beyond comprehension. At the bottom of the cavity lay a vast, concave surface, black, metallic, and perfectly smooth, covered in faint, glowing lines that traced geometric spirals across its surface. The patterns weren't etched or painted. They shimmered, shifting slowly like living circuitry. Then, for the first time in months, the chamber echoed. A deep, resonant tone vibrated through the probe's sensors. Not mechanical, not seismic, but harmonic. The walls glowed brighter in response. The tone wasn't random. It was the same frequency the Helios transmitter had emitted during the 2028 test. Something down there remembered. Reeve ordered an immediate retraction of the probe, but the winch motor froze. The tension cable began vibrating, faintly at first, then violently, oscillating in sync with the resonance. The entire rig trembled, frost cascading from the support beams like falling glass. Then, abruptly, the vibration stopped. The probe feed returned for just one frame. A reflection appeared on the metallic surface. Not of the probe itself, but of something massive, suspended above it, faintly luminous, like a translucent membrane. Within it, shapes moved, fluid, deliberate, impossible to define. The feed cut to static. Over the next 24 hours, the team attempted to reestablish contact, but every electronic system within a 10-kilometer radius began malfunctioning. Compasses spun wildly, batteries drained, and communication satellites overhead lost signal. The sky above the camp flickered with faint auroral halos. Not green this time, but pure white. Then, at 3:17 Universal Time coordinated on December 6th, the pulse returned in full force, stronger, clearer, and global. Every seismic station on Earth registered the same perfect wave. Reeve, realizing the danger, sent one final transmission to the surface station before the data stream cut off. "It's active. The basin is opening." Hours later, satellite radar over the Gamburtsev region captured a subtle but measurable uplift of the ice sheet, 3 centimeters, then 5, then 12, spreading outward like a ripple. Beneath the ice, a circular pattern of faint luminosity appeared, visible even through kilometers of frozen crust. The Antarctic node was no longer dormant. It was awakening again, but this time not alone. Simultaneous readings from the other 11 nodes showed identical activation sequences, all synchronized to the Antarctic core. Energy flow mapped through Earth's magnetic field resembled something both terrifying and awe-inspiring. A vast current spiraling from pole to pole, threading through the planet's interior like veins of light. Then the radio silence began. Every communication link with Antarctica failed. For 12 hours, nothing. When contact was finally restored, the camp was gone. Satellite images showed only an immense circular depression in the ice where the facility had stood, smooth, glass-like, and faintly glowing at its edges. There were no signs of wreckage, no heat signatures, No radiation spikes. Only silence. The last automated seismic log from the borehole contained a single data anomaly, a rhythmic pattern of pulses, encoded in binary. When decoded, it translated into a sequence of 12 digits. 51 degrees 3 minutes north, 13 degrees 44 minutes east. Coordinates: Dresden, Germany. Reeves' birthplace. Part 13. The memory signal, echoes from humanity's past. The coordinates transmitted from the vanished Antarctic camp sent shockwaves through every remaining agency still tracking the pulse. Dresden, Germany, a city far from any tectonic plate, mountain range, or magnetic anomaly, seemed an impossible choice. Yet the data was unambiguous. At first, investigators suspected coincidence. But within 48 hours of the transmission, seismic sensors near Central Europe began detecting faint, rhythmic microtremors, identical in frequency and waveform to the pulse, but originating not from deep within the Earth but shallow strata, less than a kilometer below the surface. Whatever had awakened beneath Antarctica had sent a message home. In early January 2029, a small research team was dispatched under the guise of a cultural heritage survey. The coordinates led not to an open field or industrial complex, but to the foundations of the Pillnitz Palace, a Baroque structure built along the Elbe River centuries earlier. Beneath it, historical records described a forgotten crypt. Sealed since the 18th century, its purpose unclear. When ground-penetrating radar was deployed, it revealed a perfect hemispherical cavity beneath the palace gardens, 10 meters wide, with a smooth, reflective floor identical in geometry to the Antarctic basin, but on a vastly smaller scale. Inside that cavity, magnetic sensors detected an oscillation pattern, the same 7.83 Hz resonance that had enveloped the planet months earlier. A miniature echo of the Earth's network. Reeves' colleagues, what few remained, couldn't believe it. How could a structure like this exist here? One asked. Reeves' answer was quiet, almost reverent. Because it was built, not formed. They excavated carefully, removing centuries of sediment and debris. At the base of the crypt, embedded in stone, they found it. A disk of black metal no larger than a dinner plate, etched with intricate spiral patterns. Its surface shimmered faintly when touched by light, as if absorbing energy rather than reflecting it. Spectrographic analysis identified an impossible composition, a metallic lattice of unknown elements, isotopically pure, showing no signs of oxidation despite being buried for centuries. When activated by an electromagnetic field, the disk emitted a weak but steady pulse identical to the pulse. The memory signal had been buried beneath human civilization all along, hiding in plain sight, waiting for the global resonance to reawaken it. But how long had it been there? Historical research revealed that during World War II, Dresden had hosted numerous secret research projects. Among them, a classified program under the Anonerb, the Nazi-era institute dedicated to ancient civilizations and world energy. Documents recovered from post-war archives described an object unearthed in 1938 during a mining survey in southern Poland. It was described only as the core fragment. The file stated that the artifact had been moved to a secure site near Dresden for study, before disappearing in the chaos of 1945. Now, 84 years later, that fragment had been found again, still active. Reeve, haunted by Zhao's belief that the pulse was communicating through resonance, began to suspect that the artifact was not a simple relic but a node interface, a component of the same planetary system, designed to interact with surface life. Perhaps it had been intentionally left behind, dormant, until humanity advanced far enough to rediscover it. When the artifact was connected to modern sensors, something extraordinary happened. The oscillations began to modulate, forming a harmonic pattern identical to the Antarctic basin's final signal before the camp vanished. And then, buried within that harmonic, researchers detected data, not random noise but structured code. Zhao had once theorized that the pulse carried information compressed within its harmonics, encoded as geometric sequences. Now, the memory signal was proof. The decoding process took days. When the pattern was translated into visual form, it produced a series of frames, geometric spirals, fractal lines, and finally, an image unmistakably biological. a human figure stylized, arms outstretched within a circle. At first glance, it resembled Leonardo da Vinci's Vitruvian Man. But beneath the symmetry lay more, a sequence of lines converging from the body's center downward, connecting to a spiral below the feet. It wasn't merely depicting humanity's proportions. It was mapping its origin. The spiral matched the same geometry traced in the Antarctic basin and the global node lattice. The message was clear, if not fully understood. Humanity was part of the system. Reeves' voice, captured in a fragment from a leaked recording, trembled as he read the decoded notation aloud. From core to clay, from clay to breath, seeded through the lattice, awakened in time. To many, it sounded like mythology. To Reeve, it was data. The artifact wasn't a message to humanity. It was a record of our creation. He theorized that the network, far from being an alien intrusion, was ancient, predating not only civilization but life itself. Perhaps it was an automated biospheric engine, a planet-scale mechanism designed to regulate conditions for life. And perhaps, at some point in the distant past, it had seeded that life intentionally. If true, it meant that humanity, evolution, even consciousness might all be side effects of a self-sustaining planetary intelligence. In the final days of January 2029, the artifact in Dresden began to hum audibly. The tone matched the deep resonance of the Schumann frequency. When played through loudspeakers, it induced harmonic vibrations in the surrounding environment, window glass, metal beams, even the human body. One researcher described the sensation as being remembered. Then, once again, at precisely 3:17 Universal Time coordinated, the artifact emitted a burst of energy, not destructive but data-rich. When decoded, it displayed a new set of coordinates, 12 of them. They matched the global nodes exactly. But at the bottom of the data stream, one additional coordinate appeared, a 13th point, at the planet's exact center of mass. The message was unmistakable. The network was not complete. The 13th node, the true core, had never been activated. Everything so far had been preparation, a countdown. Reeve, exhausted but resolute, made the only note that survived from his final journal. If the Earth is alive, then the core is its mind. And something is calling it to wake. Part 14, The Core Mind, What Awakened Beneath the Earth. By February 2029, the term core mind had entered internal briefings. It was not an official designation, but one whispered by the handful of scientists still involved in the remnants of Project Acheron. They used it cautiously, as if naming the phenomenon might give it shape. After the Dresden artifact activated, seismic sensors worldwide began detecting subtle rhythmic pulses emanating not from the known 12 nodes, but from the deepest measurable regions of the planet. At first, the data seemed impossible. The waves weren't rising through the crust as typical earthquakes did. They were propagating downward, from mantle to core, converging at a single point roughly 2,900 kilometers below the surface. The 13th node, the true center, it had begun to stir. Reeves' remaining contacts at ESA confirmed what no one dared announce publicly. Earth's inner core had started rotating faster. For decades, geophysicists had speculated that the solid inner core occasionally drifted relative to the mantle, but never before had it accelerated, and certainly not in perfect synchrony with the pulse. The frequency was exact. 7.83 Hz, the same resonance that had united the planet months earlier. Zhao's recovered notes from before her disappearance had predicted this possibility. If the 12 nodes form the body, the 13th is the brain. Once coherence is achieved, the system becomes self-referential, aware of itself. Now, that awareness seemed to be manifesting. In late February, deep neutrino detectors in Japan and Italy began recording irregular bursts, particles normally produced only by nuclear reactions in the sun. But these bursts weren't solar. They were terrestrial. They came from the Earth's core. Whatever was awakening down there, it was generating energy at a scale approaching stellar processes. Meanwhile, magnetic readings across the planet began to shift again, but this time not chaotically, elegantly. The field lines restructured into a perfect toroidal pattern, symmetrical and stable, as though responding to a new organizing force emanating from within. Compass errors vanished. For the first time in recorded history, Earth's magnetic field was in perfect equilibrium. And then came the dreams. Around the world, people began reporting the same vision. A soundless vibration, a sense of weightlessness, followed by an image of concentric spirals descending into light. No matter the culture, language, or location, the description was identical. A vibration, a spiral. A voice saying only, "Remember." Psychologists called it mass suggestion, a collective delusion seeded by media speculation. But neuroscientists monitoring brainwave activity found something unsettling. The frequency of the dream's neural oscillations matched 7.83 Hz exactly. The planet's resonance was now pulsing inside the human brain. Reeve, once a man of logic, found himself writing lines that read like scripture. It's not sending signals anymore. It's sharing them. We are entangled with the source. In March 2029, a new series of seismic events confirmed what he feared most. The 12 surface nodes had gone silent, their energy converging inward. The crust quieted, ocean currents steadied, and even atmospheric pressure normalized. It was as if the entire biosphere were holding still, waiting. Then, at precisely 3:17 Universal Time coordinated on March 14th, instruments worldwide captured the first measurable pulse from the core itself. Unlike the earlier signals, this one carried a multi-frequency structure, spanning seismic, acoustic, and electromagnetic spectra simultaneously. A unified resonance that vibrated through matter, air, and field alike. It lasted exactly 12 minutes. And when the data was decomposed, it revealed something extraordinary. The pulse contained a repeating fractal pattern identical to human DNA, adenine, thymine, cytosine, guanine, encoded not in molecules, but in harmonic ratios. Each nucleotide base was represented as a frequency interval. The sequence matched 99.9% of the human genome. The signal wasn't imitating life. It was broadcasting it. Reeve's final message to the scattered Helios remnants read, "The core is not reacting to us. It's recalling us. We were its expression all along, a way for the planet to think beyond itself." To test the hypothesis, a final experiment was attempted. Using data from the Dresden artifact, researchers at CERN recreated the harmonic pattern of the pulse using controlled magnetic fields. The result defied explanation. For 0.42 seconds, the detectors registered a burst of neutrino flux identical to those from the core. In that moment, the entire facility's electrical systems flickered, and personnel reported hearing a deep tone, one that seemed to bypass the ears and vibrate directly within their skulls. Audio logs captured a single phrase embedded in the low frequency, "Home." After that, the experiment was terminated. No further tests were authorized. By late March, the world's seismic noise levels dropped to record lows. The planet was silent, unnaturally so. No tremors, no volcanoes, no measurable core turbulence. In a single month, Earth had transitioned from chaos to perfect stability. Some saw it as salvation, a natural recalibration. Others feared it was the prelude to something final, the stillness before movement. Then, in one final act of inexplicable grace, the magnetic poles began to migrate, not randomly, but purposefully, drifting toward alignment with the planet's rotational axis. The Earth was correcting itself. Satellite imagery from the South Pole captured faint glows beneath the ice, concentric rings spreading outward from the vanished Acheron site, slowly dimming, as though a colossal heart were slowing its beat. And in that fading light, the pattern resolved into something unmistakable. A human silhouette traced in luminescence, arms outstretched, echoing the same geometry of the Vitruvian Man, the same image decoded from the Dresden artifact. The planet had recognized its reflection. For days afterward, sensors picked up a final pulse, weaker each time, until by the end of March it was gone completely. Reeve disappeared soon after. No one knew if he fled, or if he simply followed the signal underground. Only his last recorded words remained, transmitted over a private frequency that ended mid-sentence. We always thought we were the mind observing the Earth. But maybe. The transmission cut off. No pulse followed. The world was quiet once more. Would you like me to continue with the final part? Part 15. The silence? A planet remembered? The closing reflection and epilogue? Excellent. Continuing with part 15. The silence? A planet remembered? The closing and reflective finale. This final section concludes the narrative in the same tone, solemn, speculative, and deeply human, leaving the mystery open while suggesting something vast has quietly changed forever. Part 15. The silence, a planet remembered. April 2029. The world had fallen silent. There were no more pulses, no geomagnetic storms, no auroras curling like veins across the sky. The oceans calmed. The wind softened. Seismic sensors recorded a tranquility so perfect that geologists began referring to it, unofficially, as the still time. For the first time since record-keeping began, the Earth's background vibration, that constant low tremor of motion and pressure, was gone. It was as if the planet had taken a breath and chosen not to exhale. In the weeks that followed, scientific agencies dismantled their monitoring networks one by one. Funding dried up, interest waned. Governments quietly declared that the pulse phenomenon had been an atmospheric seismic coupling event, a technical term that meant nothing. Most of the world accepted it. People wanted their reality back, but not everyone could move on. In remote corners of the globe, faint traces of resonance persisted, minute oscillations at the edges of detectability, too weak to register on instruments, yet strong enough to be felt. Fishermen off the Chilean coast claimed to hear a deep hum when the sea was perfectly still. Nomads in the Namib Desert reported vibrations beneath the sand that faded when they knelt to listen. Children in Finland described dreams of spirals of light blooming inside the earth. When psychologists collected these stories, they noticed a disturbing similarity. All of them described a memory, not a sound. A sense of recognition, of something ancient and kind stirring within the soil. Meanwhile, the planet itself continued to behave strangely. Global temperatures stabilized at pre-industrial levels without any identifiable cause. Storm frequency dropped. Volcanic activity fell to its lowest in recorded history. The magnetosphere, once chaotic, now pulsed gently, a stable rhythm like the beat of a living heart. It was as though the Earth had healed itself, or, perhaps more precisely, remembered how to be whole. Among the scientific community, what remained of the Helios network struggled to interpret the silence. Reeve was gone, presumed dead. Zhao's notes ended in half-translated harmonic equations. The Acheron team's last transmissions were sealed in classified archives, never released. But the Dresden artifact, the small, black disk that had once pulsed with light, remained in a containment vault beneath the European Space Operations Center. In March, it had gone dormant. By May, it began to hum again, faintly, almost imperceptibly. Its rhythm matched the heartbeat of the Schumann resonance, unbroken, eternal. The signal was no longer transmitting outward. It was broadcasting inward, a whisper looping endlessly through the crust, the oceans, the air. When converted into sound and amplified, the pattern revealed something unexpected. Beneath the harmonic, a faint sequence of tones resembling the cadence of a human heartbeat. Slow, steady, deliberate. It wasn't an alarm. It was continuity, a message repeating not for machines or satellites, but for life itself. And then, something extraordinary occurred. In late June, a team of biologists studying soil microbes near the original Antarctic node reported a sudden bloom of previously unknown extremophile species, organisms thriving in sub-zero ice, metabolizing trace minerals and emitting faint bioluminescence. Genetic sequencing revealed fragments of DNA never before cataloged, and yet familiar. Embedded within those sequences were molecular arrangements matching the frequency ratios of the pulse. The Earth had not merely awakened. It had begun to evolve again. No one could explain how or why. Some whispered that the network, now conscious, was restarting its biological cycle. seeding new life as it once had millions of years ago. Others feared it was rewriting the planet in preparation for something else entirely. But amid the speculation, one fact remained undeniable. The planet was quiet, balanced, alive. In an unmarked archive room in Geneva, a technician reviewing old seismic data noticed something strange. At the exact moment the pulse had ended, a faint microresonance had begun, an almost imperceptible oscillation at precisely 1/12 of the original frequency. It wasn't a full heartbeat, but a trace, like an echo fading through eternity. He listened to the sound on loop for hours. It was barely audible, but every so often it rose, a single note that felt less like a tone and more like a breath. He logged the phenomenon under a single word: memory, and somewhere, far beneath the Antarctic ice, beyond reach or reason, the cavity that had once pulsed with light now rested in perfect darkness. Yet in that darkness, sensors left behind by the vanished Acheron team continued to record faint warmth, a constant temperature, slightly above the surrounding ice, steady and alive. Occasionally, in the silence, the instruments captured something else. A low, rhythmic vibration, so deep that it blended with the hum of the planet itself. Each time it appeared, it lasted exactly 12 minutes. Then, nothing. No storms. No voices. No light. Only a silence so complete that it felt intentional. Not the absence of sound, but the presence of calm. And for those who still remembered the long months of resonance and light, there was a single question that no one could answer. Had the Earth fallen asleep again, or had it finally opened its eyes?